São Paulo, Brazil, the night of October 31, 2002. A walled house breathes under jacaranda branches in a moneyed neighborhood on the city's south side. Inside, lamps are off. The security system's lights blink green. Somewhere in a government building across town, there is a thin folder with a stamped spine. DHPP, Homicide and Personal Protection Division, and an intake page that begins with a meticulous line. 0050, female, 19, reports returning home to find parents deceased, house in disarray, apparent burglary. In a photograph, the foyer is staged for sorrow. Drawers yanked, cushions split, a portrait set askew. Upstairs, a bedroom door is slightly open, revealing an awful stillness that the lens does not describe so much as refuse. On the kitchen counter sits a half-empty bottle of mineral water, and next to it a hand towel folded once and placed with care. At dawn, a blonde college student with a plain face and an even voice sits under fluorescent lights at the precinct, answering questions in Portuguese that seem to have been rehearsed. She says she had been out. She says she left her younger brother at an internet cafe so he wouldn't be home late. She says she came back with her boyfriend and found the house torn and wrong. She says she dialed 190 and waited outside. Within days, the story changes. Her name is Suzane Von Richthofen. The dead are her parents, Manfred, a civil engineer, German-Brazilian, and Maricia, a respected psychiatrist. They lived well. They demanded much. Their daughter, 19 years old and enrolled in law school, was the sort of girl who moved easily between high gates and well-lit rooms. She had a boyfriend, a young man with calloused hands and a bike he loved. His last name was Cravinhos. He had a brother. The three of them became the axis of a case that would seize Brazil's imagination and curdle it. As detectives reconstructed the night and pushed at the seams of the staged burglary, a pattern showed. The alarm had been disabled from inside. The safe had been opened without damage. Cash was missing. A day later, one of the Cravinhos brothers paid for a new motorcycle in cash. A week later, confessions began. For a few hours, then retractions, then new confessions, each pointing to the other in a triangle of guilt. By the end of that week, the police stopped calling it an invasion. They called it by its proper name, a double homicide planned from within. The press descended. Cameras prowled the sidewalks. Photographers shot the gate and the girl behind it. Headlines chewed the surname, Richthofen, and found in it a hook for a nation's uneasy fascination with wealth, foreignness, and brutality. Tabloids leaned into a cruel moniker they would not let go, the evil blonde. Prosecutors prepared a case. Defense attorneys prepared a counterstory. The country watched. There is much we know because courts made it part of the public record. We know that in 2006, a São Paulo jury convicted Suzane and the Cravinhos brothers. We know the sentences were long, 38 to 39 years. We know the motive offered by the state, money and freedom, an inheritance and the end of parental control. We know, too, what is contested and will likely always be. Who conceived the plan? What did she do upstairs and what did she not? What is the truth beneath the competing stories that came to define the case? This is not a ghost story. It is a story of the most domestic kind of darkness, filial knife turned inward, and the way a country turned it into a mirror. It is a story about performance, how grief looks when it's watched, how love sounds when taped, how a courtroom becomes a theater, and a girl becomes an emblem. But why did this happen? And why was it written, then rewritten, then staged as rival truths? If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into the world's darkest historical mysteries and crimes. And tell us where you're listening from. We love hearing from our community. To understand the case that would bear her name, you have to understand where Suzane came from. The Von Richthofen home stood on a quiet street behind walls that were less about menace than about custom. São Paulo's high neighborhoods teach you early that security is etiquette. Inside, life followed an ordered beat. School, piano, German classes, summer trips. A younger brother tutored in aero modeling and physics by a father who loved machines and precision. Manfred, by most accounts, was both exacting and generous. A civil engineer who had held comfortable posts and projects, he was the kind of father who supervised homework and criticized friends. He was also the man who padded down the stairs at midnight to make cocoa if someone was crying. He expected excellence. He wanted a future that matched his effort. Maricia was a psychiatrist, a fixture in professional circles, a woman whose listening could be a velvet glove or a stiletto depending on what truth was needed. Friends remember her as warmth contained by steel. She could read a room. She could, when necessary, read a daughter. The children were two. Andres, younger by several years, brilliant, earnest, attached to his father's side. And Suzane, bright, pretty, with the pale hair and self-possession that cameras would later learn so well. She moved between worlds, German language at home, Portuguese at school, English in class. The name Richthofen carried a whisper of fable, as if a family tree might sprout a red triplane in a long-ago branch. People asked about the Red Baron. Most of the time, the family let the question pass with a smile. Whatever the truth of genealogy, the reality was simpler. They were a successful São Paulo family with immigrant roots and deep local ties. The boy who would become the hinge of the story entered through a hobby. Aero modeling. Building and flying small planes was a pastime that belonged to both the age of books of aeronautics and of computers.
Rich, who could buy the best kits, and to the devoted, who could make anything fly. At the airfield of a club in the north of the city, among oil-slicked workbenches and balsa, Andreas found mentors. One of them was Daniel Cravinhos, a few years older than Suzane, from a more modest background, serious about engines, serious about speed. His older brother, Christian, shared the passion. The brothers were, as many young men are, half dreamers, half mechanics. They could coax a carburetor back to life and could spend money as soon as it hit their hands. Suzane met Daniel through Andreas. Conversations turned into rides. Rides turned into a relationship. She slipped into a world of night roads and motor oil, the thrill of being away from the strict geometry of her parents' expectations. The Von Richthofens disapproved. Whether their disapproval was cold class prejudice or thoughtful concern, accounts diverge, and everyone who tells the story has a reason to shade it. What is consistent is this. By 2002, the house was divided. A 19-year-old with a strong will and a taste of independence had met a boyfriend her parents did not want, and that opposition hardened everything. Money matters. In this house, money was both cushion and control. There were allowances and there were limits. There were savings, investments, a safe at home, a bank, a plan. In their arguments, money became proxy for freedom. Leave the house. Live with him. Cut the cord. Not while you are under our roof, said the parents. There were also temptations. Where there is visible wealth, there are fantasies about what happens when it moves. An inheritance became, in the ugliest telling, a solution to a teenage problem. They will never let us be together, goes one version. There is money that will be ours if we are alone, goes another. In the months before the murder, the relationship between the young couple and the parents seesawed between confrontations and truces. Suzane left the house once, briefly, to live with Daniel. She returned. There were promises. There were threats. Friends later said they watched the family argue and felt a heaviness they didn't know how to disperse. They also said they never imagined where it would lead. The night of October 31 begins like 100 other nights and diverges in slow, deliberate steps. Early evening, the house still and ordinary. Later, a plan, the shape of which would be contested forever after, unfolds. At some point, the security system is turned off, and the garage gate secured in a way that makes re-entry easy for whoever knows how. A young woman goes out with her boyfriend. Her younger brother is steered to a safe place, away from home, an internet cafe, a friend's company, a place that keeps him from being upstairs. Sometime before midnight, the Cravinhos brothers approach the house. They are admitted. Whether Suzane leads them inside or waits downstairs as they climb the stairs, these details would be fought sentence by sentence at trial. What isn't contested is that the parents, in their bedroom, are attacked while they sleep. A blunt instrument, iron bars, later recovered and shown to jurors, meets flesh and bone. The savagery of impact is masked by silence. Neighbors hear nothing over the ordinary city night. In the crime scene photographs, there is disarray. Drawers pulled, closet doors open, a safe disturbed. The staging is clumsy and purposeful at once, an attempt to say, this was a robbery. This was a break-in from outside. Afterward, time becomes elastic. The trio moves through the house, touching, looking, leaving. Cash is extracted from the safe, tens of thousands of reals according to later estimates, and pocketed. Somewhere in this window, a car leaves and returns. Somewhere, a phone call is made, but not the call to police. Eventually, a call to 190 rings through. In the audio, a voice that will be transcribed 100 times says words in a carefully measured order. We came home. The door was open. My parents are not well. Send help. Detectives from DHPP, a unit that has seen more domestic indescribables than it cares to,
arrive to a scene that feels like a test. Burglaries, when they turn to murder, tend to look like chaos. This looks like staging. The security company's logs show an alarm disarmed and left disarmed. The marks of forced entry are cosmetic. The safe has been opened in a manner betraying familiarity. When asked to recount the night, the young woman and her boyfriend are steady, perhaps too steady. Some witnesses later say she did not cry enough or cried strangely, as if performing. These impressions are dangerous. Grief has 1,000 faces, but detectives gather them because they are human and because juries listen to them. Then the first truly stupid mistake. Within 24 hours, one of the Cravinhos brothers buys a motorcycle in cash. He cannot resist the feel of having money and making it move. The seller mentions it. The police note it. The line between "we found our loved ones murdered" and "we have large quantities of unexplained cash" tightens like a snare. Within days, the three are back at the precinct. This time, the questions are different. This time, the order of the night is broken down to minutes. Who disabled the alarm? Who opened the safe? Who went upstairs? Who swung the iron? Under the hot light of attention, cracks appear. There is a confession, rushed, tearful, from one of the brothers. There is an implicating statement from the other. There is briefly a confession from Suzane that she later partly retracts and then reframes. Every telling still ends in the same room, the parents' bedroom, asleep in their home, and three young people inside the house when they should not have been. The indictment moves quickly. The state's theory is brutally simple. The trio planned the murder for gain, inheritance, cash, and freedom, a life together without parental control. The method, attack in sleep, staging a robbery, was chosen to reduce risk and divert suspicion. The purchases made with the stolen cash, electronics, a motorbike, indicate premeditation and a failure to grasp how closely money is watched in a case like this. The case goes to trial in 2006, almost 4 years after the murders, in the Forum Criminal de Barra Funda, where São Paulo's most notorious trials gather like storm fronts. The courtroom becomes theater because courtrooms always do. The prosecutors, speaking for the dead, thread timelines and bank withdrawals and phone records, and the accused shifting statements into a rope. They read text messages. They show diagrams. They say her name and his name, and then the plural, os reus, until the words slide toward judgment. The defense answers with a counter-narrative. In one version, Suzane is impressionable, dominated by an older boyfriend and his brother, coaxed into a plan she did not fully understand and did not fully carry out. In another, darker version, presented later in the court of public opinion, she is a survivor of psychological control, and in some accounts, worse, allegations that were denied fiercely by those who knew the family and that found no footing in the official record. The defense leans on the ambiguity of who held what, in what room, at what hour, and on the idea that youth makes terrible counsel. Through it all sits a young woman whose face has become Brazil's fixation. Cameras catch her brushing hair behind an ear, leaning to speak low to her lawyer, cracking once into tears that tabloids will count frame by frame. The press doubles down on the moniker it had chosen for her, an epithet that reduced a complicated and monstrous human act to a color and a cruelty. Evil Blonde sells papers. It also sells a story everyone can carry home and tell at dinner without knowing anything else. The jury convicts. The sentences: 39 years and 6 months for Suzane, 38 years and 6 months for Daniel, 38 years and 6 months for Christian. Brazil's system is not identical to the American. Regimes of custody are graduated, closed, semi-open, open, and reductions accrue for time served, for work, for study. Headlines declare justice, others declare tragedy. The country exhales, and yet the story refuses to settle. Because after the trial comes the retelling. In 2021, 2 films release simultaneously on streaming, each presenting the same night from competing points of view. One, titled The Girl Who Killed Her Parents, the other, The Boy Who Killed My Parents. Both are dramatizations based on records and testimony, both scripted with input from a true crime writer who had read the files for years. Watch them back to back, and the floor tilts. In one, she is orchestrator. In the other, he is predator. In both, the bedroom door opens all the same, and a family ends. Conflicting accounts and theories. Unlike the mysteries we often explore, this case does not ask who. It asks why, and which why you believe. The state's case: greed and freedom. Prosecutors argued that money and independence formed the motive. An inheritance, delayed by parental lives, could be accelerated. An undisapproved relationship could be preserved. The staging, fake burglary, safe cracked, alarm off, was impersonation of a simple narrative. The purchases with stolen cash in the immediate aftermath leave little oxygen for doubt about premeditation. Courts agreed. This remains the official story. The domination defense. At various points, defense attorneys and sympathetic commentators have painted Suzane as a young woman under the sway of an older, stronger boyfriend and his brother, a follower rather than a leader, in a plan that took shape outside her capacity to refuse. In this telling, she is culpable, but not architect. The Cravinhos brothers, for their part, insisted in key moments that the plan was mutual, or hers. Each had reason to allocate blame away from himself. Each had reason to draw her in. The jury weighed these cross-accusations and reached its conclusion. The public continues to argue. Abuse claims. Years after the crime, the idea of an oppressive or abusive household was floated in media conversations as an explanation or context. Those closest to the family and the investigators denied it. No such finding appears in the official record. Here, the ethical ground is thin. It is dangerous to claim proof where there is none, and dangerous to ignore the complicated inner lives of private families. The responsible place to leave it is where the record leaves it: unproven allegations that do not outweigh what is established. The instantaneous planning theory. Some observers resist the idea of a grand, months-long plan and see instead a reckless plot consolidated over days. They point to impulsivity, teenage impatience, the immediacy of the spending afterward, the crudity of the staging, as signs of a plan that wasn't so much masterful as merely unrestrained. This reading doesn't absolve, it describes the caliber of deliberation, not genius, just momentum. Media distortion. Perhaps the most corrosive force in understanding the case was not testimony, but framing.
To call a 19-year-old an evil blonde is to turn a defendant into an archetype. It erases the Cravinhos brothers from public imagination, erases the parents' humanity, and replaces them with tabloid archetypes: the angel-faced killer, the hot-headed boyfriend, the rich, controlling parents. Sensationalism can be its own theory, offering the illusion of clarity where none exists. The inheritance calculus. Some analysts argue that the motive wasn't only immediate cash, the stolen bills stuffed into pockets and spent, but the promise of long-term control of assets, properties, accounts, a comfortable life. Brazil inheritance law made such thinking both grotesque and, in a teenager's short-term math, plausible. The counter to that theory is the clumsiness that followed. You do not buy a motorcycle in cash with money from a safe if you mean to be patient. You do that if you think you've gotten away with it and you are 20-something and electric with the idea of being untouchable. Separate fact from folklore, and what remains is hard to dispute. The crime occurred inside the home. The burglary was staged. The alarm was disarmed from within. The safe was opened by someone who knew how. The trio left with cash. Purchases were made almost immediately. Confessions and retractions flowed. Each defendant had an incentive to shift blame. A jury heard it all and convicted all three. The records called it murder. The tabloids whispered something else. After the trial, life for the living became a long series of smaller rooms.
In prison, Tremembé for her, the same complex that has held Brazil's most notorious female convicts, Suzane adapted. Reports from the years that followed show a progression familiar to anyone who studies Brazil's carceral system: work inside, study, gradual regime changes. She became a shorthand in newspapers for discussions about privilege behind bars, rehabilitation, the elasticity of sentences in a country with overcrowded prisons and conflicting ideas of what punishment should do. The Cravinhos brothers served their time similarly in men's facilities with their own internal economies of power and rumor. Daniel, the boyfriend, became an ever-shifting figure in headlines: monster, dupe, equal partner. Christian existed even further in the glare's shadow, surfacing only when an appeal or a hearing demanded a new photograph. The younger brother, Andreas, vanished by choice. He was the child spared by the logistics of the plan, and yet perhaps marked most deeply by the living aftermath. He became a symbol of the human wreckage crimes leave in concentric circles. Bright boy, then a name in footnotes, then a man who says little. If you are tempted to look for him now, don't. Let him have whatever quiet is left. The case's cultural afterlife is strange and busy. True crime writers like Ilana Kasoy poured through the files and produced books that pulled back the curtain on police work, forensic minutiae, courtroom tactics. The twin films of 2021 were a formal experiment in point of view and an acknowledgement that even when the state has spoken, people want to tell the story again, this time with their preferred emphasis. Each new retelling redraws the moral: a cautionary tale about spoiled youth, a parable about class, a meditation on how performance can fool the eye. Perhaps the most enduring legacy is how the case yokes modern anxieties. What does wealth do to empathy? How do screens and headlines distort individuals into roles? How can even the most comfortable domestic spaces become their own worst danger? The Richthofen case sits at the intersection of these questions like a car at a troublesome crossing. People looked because it confirmed what they feared about each other. People looked because it was impossible not to. And then there is this. Whenever a story becomes iconic, it also becomes a lie. A human event, messy, specific, full of unprintable details, gets pressed into a mold. Angel-faced killer, domineering boyfriend, cruel parents, a safe stuffed with cash, a house turned theater. Some of these pieces are true, some are simplifications. All of them, repeated enough, begin to feel like gospel. What we might say standing back from the binders and the films and the quotes is simpler and more chilling. A family ran into the sharp edge of desire. A daughter and two young men stepped through a door that cannot be stepped back through. A city watched, and a country, telling itself 100 different stories about what that meant, turned the case into a mirror for its own fears. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden, not about who swung what or where, those are settled, but about motive's core, something that exists where love and control and money braid so tightly that to a teenager cutting the braid feels like freedom. The rest is ash, ink, and the uncomfortable knowledge that the story was never entirely theirs again once it left that house. Which version of that night do you find most convincing? The prosecutor's cold calculus of money and freedom, or the defense's portrait of a young woman pulled into a plan by a dominating partner? Or do you think the truth lives somewhere between motive and momentum? Which detail disturbed you the most? The staged burglary, the cash spent within days, or the way the story was reframed again and again until it became two films with the same ending? Tell us in the comments. And if this investigation held your attention, please like this video, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into the cases that won't leave the public conscience. Let us know your city and country. We pin every location in our growing community map. In our next episode, we'll unbox another case that turned a home into a stage. Pages from a provincial coroner's log where a whole village agreed to forget what they saw.